I'm making this documentary about Measure 114 to really show the people, show my students, show everybody that, we are taking proactive steps in this industry to try to maintain the rights that we have, and two, come up with some sort of solution to gun violence that will actually do something. My name is Bryan Mumford. I am the owner of PDX Arsenal Concealed Carry. I'm NRA instructor certified, BCI instructor certified, USCCA instructor certified, first aid, stop the bleed, and have over a decade of teaching experience in that field. Yeah, I had a pretty good flow going before Measure 114 got passed. I, had a good balance in life between everything that requires my time. After Measure 114, my life went straight back to 15 or 16-hour days. So it's been incredibly chaotic. We had over 550 people sign up for our class in about a month, and trying to meet the demand from that after the fact has been a lot. The Second Amendment, to me, I hold in a very high regard because I genuinely believe that that's one of the foundational pieces that allows us to operate in the society that we live in currently. We see other societies that civilians are not allowed to have guns, and we see the overreach of the government. We see human rights abuses that are pretty much gone unchecked because the power isn't with the people. And as much as our politicians here in the States would like to take our guns away, I think that is the major thing that distinguishes us from places that can't have them. I would like to believe that the anti-gun crowd has a kernel of good intention behind the initiatives that they propose. However, from a bird's eye perspective, the way that I view this is that Measure 114 was the groundwork that was to be laid for next year's election cycle with IP-18, the full-on assault weapons ban in Oregon. So I believe IP-17, which was rebranded into Measure 114, was used as a litmus test to see where the voters in Oregon fell. IP-18 was legislation drafted this last year for this year's election cycle, which would bring an assault weapons ban to Oregon on the state level, making a combination of features on a firearm, from things like a pistol grip to a vertical foregrip to a threaded barrel, which would designate these firearms as assault weapons and therefore prohibit them in their entirety. Measure 114 was an initiative founded by Lift Every Voice, which is a national anti-gun group. They rallied support and got it from a local pastor in Portland at a Lutheran church who put his name on it and gathered support to get it on last year's ballot in 2022. And the people apparently signed enough times to get that on the ballot, where then it was voted on. Well, I think the campaign was full of blatant lies, all the way down to the text that was put on the ballot itself.
Reverend Dr. Mark Knutson with Lift Every Voice Oregon, the group behind the ballot measure, disputes the assertion that 114 infringes on the constitutional rights of Oregonians.
Those who already have them, it already says that they would keep them. They could use them on their property or at shooting ranges. So nobody's taking away anybody's guns or their magazines.
He said in drafting the measure, the Interfaith Coalition worked with gun owners, hunters, and law enforcement to make the law equitable, reasonable, and just.
Statewide, police also say they're not ready to implement the permits to purchase that the measure calls for. Chris Skinner is the president of the Oregon Association Chiefs of Police.
The ballot measure, in the way it was written, had some unanswered questions that we have to have answered before we understand what the process can look like.
Every officer I've talked to has been vehemently against Measure 114. They understand more so than anybody, with their knowledge of the inner workings of their departments, how understaffed they are, how they lack the proper resources to do the job that they're currently doing, let alone add this additional layer of burden that would be caused by Measure 114 with new licensing and new processes and background checks and fingerprints. I know for certain that things like homicides by police while in the line of duty, things like suicides. All of these external circumstance numbers were factored into the stats that they were using to push their agenda with Measure 114 about how many people a day die in Oregon, which I believe they said was like 2 a day. And, you know, when you hear those type of statistics, you go, wow, 2 a day, that's too many, right? And even people in the gun industry could agree with that. However, when you look at how many of these were justified or done through acts that weren't violent other than to themselves, it changes the narrative that's being painted. With Measure 114, what they are proposing is that any magazine with the capacity to accept more than 10 rounds would be in violation of the law. So first of all, it is not a high capacity magazine. It is a standard capacity magazine that has been in use since these guns have been invented with magazines. Now, the exceptions are A, transporting your high capacity magazine to or from a shooting range to practice, or in use inside of your own home or on private land that you own. And so other than that, they're not going to allow you to take a magazine which has the capacity to accept more than 10 rounds out of your home. The other problem with that, and this was more in the fine print of Measure 114, was they also included language that prohibited magazines where you had the capability of modifying the magazines to accept more than 10 rounds within, I believe, a 24-hour period. And so when you understand the anatomy of a magazine and you understand that nearly all of them have a removable base plate, that means that those could be easily modified. So in essence, that fine print made it so even if it was a dedicated 10-round magazine, it would still be in violation of the law. I don't think that a 10-round magazine ban is effective at all because of somebody's ability to reload quickly. And that's what we saw happen down in California, was that they implemented a 10-round magazine ban, and they realized after the fact that, okay, well, somebody can just drop the magazine release button, throw another one in, and drop the bolt chambering around in under a second. And so when they realized that that wasn't effective, then they implemented a new law that said that you can't have detachable magazines. They just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And after years and years of doing that, you just don't realize, you know, how effective it is in the long term.
The lawyer representing the gun rights group writes, banning magazines over 10 rounds is no more likely to reduce criminal abuse of guns than banning high horsepower engines is likely to reduce criminal abuse of automobiles. And that the only thing the ban contained in 114 ensures is that a criminal unlawfully carrying a firearm with a magazine over 10 rounds will have a potentially devastating advantage over his law-abiding victim.
There are self-defense situations out there that are going to require more than 10 rounds. Now, can you carry a spare 10-round magazine on you and have 20 overall? Yes, the law doesn't prohibit that, but the truth of the matter is most people are not going to choose to carry an additional 10-round magazine on them. So there's that side, the real-world application side of how the magazine capacity ban would affect people on an individual basis. And then you have the other side, which is the permit to purchase. And what we are seeing right now, what we've been seeing ever since the passage of Measure 114, is people being denied their constitutional right to bear arms. People, first-time gun owners, are going out, no criminal record, no mental health issues, no issues at all that would prevent them from owning a gun. They fill out their background check and they get put as a number in a queue, which I think at one point exceeded 40,000. So you wouldn't be picking up your gun for months. Now, the question I would ask is, what does that individual do if they have a break-in, a violent encounter within that time frame? So they campaigned under the guise that this was going to keep children safe at school. This was going to, you know, prevent you from having to worry when you go shopping at a grocery store. They pulled on the heartstrings of current events that affect all of us, including us in the gun industry, and tried to use that to drive their agenda, which would resolve none of the issues that they were campaigning on. And when I was referencing the text on the ballot, the way that they had worded that was that voting no on Measure 114 maintains current law, which requires FFLs to request a criminal background check. Now, anybody who's bought a gun in Oregon knows that they don't request a criminal background check, they're required to complete one. And so I know several people that I've spoken with personally that said that they voted yes on Measure 114 simply because they got misled. So, the tactics pulled in this last voting cycle were unacceptable. They apply those words common sense to it, but it's everything but common sense. And I say that because when you look at other states that have implemented the same type of laws that are being proposed here in Oregon, it is extremely ineffective to completely ineffective at doing what they've set it up to do. You still see major urban cities, places which have the most stringent gun laws, and they still have crazy amounts of gun violence. So as far as the requirements for the permit to purchase go, they're going to require a basic handgun safety component where you're going to be going through essentially all the things that you would be in a concealed handgun licensing class. But they've also added an additional education piece where it is the applicant's ability to demonstrate in person loading, unloading, locking, storing, and firing a gun. Now, the word firing was put in there, which adds an incredible layer of work for the education part because of the lack of ranges that we have here available in Oregon and the lack of certified instructors which would be authorized to teach said class.
He says there are also unknowns on how the fingerprints, safety classes, and competency demonstrations are going to take place.
Traditionally, when we have either new legislation, whether it's a House bill or a Senate bill that goes through our processes, we are invited to the table to have conversations about the unintended consequences. And in this particular case, I think what our hope would have been is that we were involved in this conversation sooner.
And so that's the other part of Measure 114 that's completely unclear even to this point, is that who is authorized, because they say that they have to be law enforcement certified, but nobody specifies, is that Oregon State Police, is that the county sheriff stations, are other local instructors who are certified to teach concealed licensing authorized to teach this new class. So a lot of the phone calls that I get every single day are asking me these very similar questions that I don't have an answer for them. While I don't agree that licensing should be required, I see the benefit of the class that is a part of that licensing. And so do I believe that people should be educated before carrying a gun? Absolutely. Should it be mandated by the law? I'm indifferent on. But I hope that people have enough drive and common sense to want to be safe and responsible with their gun to where they go out and seek professional training. Historically speaking, registration leads to confiscation. We've seen that time and time again. And so that's why many of us in the industry, including myself as a gun owner and a gun business owner, will always advocate for no gun registry. The registry that would be created and put into place after 114 went into effect would also include a publicly available database showing which guns you own, how many guns you own, and from what I heard but hadn't verified was also the location of where these guns are. Well, it's very concerning because guns are obviously, one, a valuable item, and two, a powerful tool if put into the wrong hands. And so as an instructor, I'm constantly practicing myself and advocating to students to practice gun safety in regards to locking up your guns, making sure that you're limiting liability on who has access to them. With all of the drama surrounding Measure 114, I started getting creative on ways that we could band together and unite. And something that I've wanted to do in the past was contact all of the other local instructors here around the Oregon area and kind of all get on the same page. Because while we didn't necessarily look at each other as competition and try to, tear each other down, on the other hand, we weren't building each other up. And the way that I see it is that with this other side becoming so organized and constantly attacking us, it is going to require a unified front on our end to keep pressing forward. So I started a group on Facebook called the Oregon Firearm Instructor Coalition. And we've had a few great meetings where we're discussing about how we would all like to move forward and how we'd like to see this, happen if it has to. Now, obviously, all of us are really praying and pulling and, giving our resources to the fight against it to hopefully shut it down in its entirety. But we're also preemptively planning on, a worst case scenario. We don't know what we don't know. And so what I commonly see is that people uneducated about guns solely get their information from social media, from Hollywood, from mainstream media, and they derive their opinions, their unfounded opinions, based off of what they hear. And so my hat comes off in the biggest sense of the term to people that come to my class vehemently anti-gun, but with the willingness to come get an education about them. And what I love is the opportunity to have those individuals in my class, not try to persuade them into thinking or believing in what I believe, but to give them the raw, unadulterated facts and allow them to make an educated decision, which oftentimes leads them to, switch their mind. We had the perfect storm. We had all of the uncertainties surrounding COVID and all the fear that was driven from that. We had all of the rioting and social unrest. We had a really bad fire season with looting. And, then you pair all of these issues with an understaffed police force and a district attorney that chooses not to prosecute serious offenses. And so what culminates out of that is a society that pretty much runs lawless. And that's what we continue to witness all the way through today, where narcotic use in open sight on streets, burglaries, assaults, serious crimes just go unchecked. And our jails are pretty much a revolving door. So our business continues to thrive based off of people understanding that and wanting to take, countermeasures to protect themselves and their families. I'm not out there capitalizing off of fear. I will never advertise to students saying, hey, they're coming to take your guns, do this now before you can't anymore. Those aren't tactics that I use to generate business. I am a firm believer that, those conclusions have already been drawn by the time they come to my website and inquire about which classes I have available. So my job is to keep my opinions out of class. My job is to teach people about guns, and that's one of the main things I love, is that for 4.5 hours, we get every race, every gender, every sexual orientation, immigrants, non-immigrants. We get everybody in class, and we can all unite in a 4-hour window around one common goal about learning how to be safe with guns. And I love that. The only thing that's going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And at the end of the day, regardless of how you feel about guns, that's a fact that you can't change. So whether it's the police that show up with them, or whether it's, you or somebody in your household that has one to defend the family, when somebody breaks in with a deadly weapon and is intent on hurting or killing you and your family, your options are limited at that point. People don't feel safe in their own city. People realize that in the event that they need the police, that if and when they come, they're going to be extremely late, and it's going to be after whatever event they called about has already unfolded. And I think the third thing people are rushing into the classes over are politicians threatening to take our guns away. Those 3 factors right there are the biggest drivers of business to the gun industry. A crazy part of my job is getting to hear the different stories and reasoning for why my students are coming into my class, whether that was an estranged partner that became violent, or they had an attempted home break-in, or a violent encounter out in public, which, opened up their eyes and showed them that this isn't going to happen to me mentality isn't going to work forever. Unfortunately, we hear a lot of stories from our students that they are coming to take our class because this happened, and without a gun, they didn't know what they would have done. And even on the instructor side, 2 out of 3 of us have had our homes broken into or attempted to be broken into within the last 2 years. Side note, wrong house. I think there's been some positive and some negative things that have come out of social media in regards to guns. The positive thing, I love seeing people call each other out in the industry about things like trigger discipline or muzzle awareness. We get to kind of police each other and hopefully collectively become better as a industry. The negative things I see associated with it are, the people posting pictures of a gun pointing right at a camera and using guns inappropriately, whether that be for social media clout or things to gain followers. And unfortunately, that puts the rest of us who are operating in the right fashion, it gives us a bad name. I think our politicians are grasping at straws to try to point the finger at anything but the actual underlying issues that need to be addressed, like mental health. So they want to blame the magazine capacity size, they want to blame the bump stock, they want to blame the pistol brace, they want to blame everything but the root cause, which needs to be addressed. And until it is, we aren't going to see any change in what's occurring around our country with gun violence. I see it every day in my normal life with people that I interact with, friends, family, coworkers, associates. You know, it's very rare that if you haven't been touched by mental health in some way, whether that's depression or anxiety, almost all of us know somebody who has. I see that as being the main issue that needs to be addressed, which is the foundational issue that causes gun violence. I mean, healthy, sane people are not going out and shooting other individuals. So things like mental health and bullying and all these things that play a part into changing somebody's psyche to the point where they feel like that's their acceptable outlet is to go actively shoot innocent people. It does need to be addressed. How it gets addressed, that's the debate that we need to seriously start talking about. Any conclusion, guys, get involved. Please get active in this fight. It's going to take a collective effort from all of us. I'm here to help lead things where I can and provide resources to those looking for them, but please reach out for help because we need it. What I would like to see is Measure 114 get shut down in its entirety. I think we're a ways off from seeing that be the case, but going to continue to fund it and fight it and hopefully get it shut down. If it is to get passed, you know, we're going to do everything we can to make this inexpensive and easy because we understand that this shouldn't be a thing at all. So we'll do what we can at PDX Arsenal to play our role. You can find us on social media, Facebook at PDX Arsenal Concealed Carry. You can also find us on Instagram at PDX_Arsenal.